Today, I want to talk about the other pandemic that makes COVID-19 look like a picnic. Now, COVID-19 was dramatic because it affected a lot of people constantly, and it had direct consequences, rapid direct consequences. This other pandemic affects billions of people on the planet and causes untold personal, community, national and international harm. But it is a pandemic which is assisted by the private investment for private profit mantra, which dominates almost every aspect of the economy around the globe. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about obesity. obesity. It's something which I'm familiar with and have had a long life battle with. Obesity. Now, those of you who are a little bit more politically aware and look at things historically will have noticed that in the 19th century the ruling classes were obese and the working classes were basically skinny. And to a significant degree it was felt in the 19th century in the Western world to be obese was a way of showing off your wealth. A century later, things have been turned on their head. People with disposable income and assets are normally not obese, while other people in the community are obese. And obesity is not just a Western phenomenon. It is a problem which besets people around the world. First Nations people, or the remnants of First Nations people around the world, people who are unemployed. And why is it an issue? It's an issue because obesity has profound implications for the individual and the community. Biologically, we have a feast-famine metabolism. And as human beings, this is the first time in human history where there has been a excess of food for most of the world. Not everybody. There's about 1 billion people out of the current 8 billion that still have issues regarding calorific intake. But everybody else has the problem of balancing activity with calorific intake. So obesity isn't a personal choice, as most people think, or a failure of the individual to look after themselves. Obesity is a community and national and international problem, and it besets the human race in 2023 because of the economic system we have, because of the monetarisation of food production. Most food that people on limited incomes have access to is packaged food. And packaged food is a great transnational industry which is dominated once again by a handful of transnational corporations. Packaged food is easy to process, it's easy to transport, and it can be relatively cheap. But this occurs because of a variety of reasons. One, because of the substandard nature of the contents which are dominated by sugar, salt, fat, carbohydrate. And if you walk into a supermarket and look at all the packaged food, you'll see that if you actually look at the small print, that most packaged food is added carbohydrates, added fat, added salt, added sugar. I'll give you a simple example. I was looking at 7 bottles of passata, some from Australia, some from overseas. They all had added sugar, although it wasn't stated on the bottles that it was added sugar. And the sugar ranged from 4.1 grams per 100 mils of passata to 7.6 grams per 100 mils. And interestingly, it was the Australian passata, Australian-made passata, which had the highest amount of sugar in it. So why is obesity an issue? Well, it's an issue because it has profound implications for the individual. And if an individual is obese when they're young, they will tend to be obese for the rest of their lives because of the adipose tissues, the adaptation of the adipose tissue when they're young to overconsumption. The scourge of diabetes, especially adult onset diabetes, can be laid directly at the feet of the type of diet we eat, not just in the Western world, but in the developing world and the third world. We notice as societies become more accustomed to eating packaged food, the problems which didn't exist in those communities before the introduction of packaged food develop. A classical example is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, which have one of the highest rates of diabetes in the world. This diabetes leads to renal failure, heart disease, premature death. And why? It's very simple. To eat healthy is an expensive undertaking, a very expensive undertaking. Fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh meat, fresh dairy products, they are all relatively expensive in comparison to packaged food. And if you live in remote parts of the world, obviously packaged food becomes the dominant type of food that you eat. So I said before, food production has become a business. Weight loss has become an industry. Every second advertisement on the net or television or radio is about some weight loss program. And corporations have understood that people are keen to lose weight, and if they can monetize eating, they will make an extremely good profit. And that's why we see the explosion in the last 50 years of these fast food outlets around the world, which have high carbohydrate, high fat, high sugar, high salt products. In 2023, the damage caused by obesity, which is induced by the type of society we have and the type of food production we have, far outstrips the damage caused by COVID-19 and any other major threat that we follow. It far outstrips infectious diseases like tuberculosis and malaria, because obesity is no longer a Western issue. It is no longer an issue for the poorest sections of Western society. It is an issue for the developing in the third world. With the privatisation of food production, with globalisation and corporatisation, corporations can send packaged food at a minimal price to wide parts of the world, many parts of the world. So it's an issue. It's also an issue because of the lifestyle that we have developed as human beings. Human beings were biologically adapted for a non-sedentary lifestyle. as the human beings were developed and over time, DNA, which allowed people to walk and walk rapidly and walk great distances, was the DNA which won out. And DNA, which allowed people to feast when local products were available and survive during lean periods, again won out. So in the 21st century, we are now faced with a problem that we have a DNA which is best suited to life that occurred 50,000 years ago. A walking lifestyle, a nomadic lifestyle, a lifestyle which was based on feast and famine, a lifestyle which was based on eating fresh, seasonal food. So obesity is not a personal problem. It has personal consequences, but to a significant degree, the amount of obesity which occurs in a society is directly related to the legislative agenda which is passed by governments. Directly related, and as the food industry, the packaged food industry, is a particularly powerful industry, more powerful than the tobacco industry, more powerful than the pharmaceutical industry. It employs extraordinary numbers of people. We find ourselves in a situation where governments are not willing to entertain the changes that are necessary to alert people to what is in packaged food and change the way we work as a society because of our sedentary lifestyle, not just in the workplace in the majority of cases, but also at home, where access to a computer, access to a television, access to a gaming machine is the primary focus of most people in society. This is a sedentary lifestyle. No wonder we've seen a proliferation of gyms, proliferation of Weight Watchers organisations, a proliferation of drugs and surgical interventions to deal with this pandemic. As I said before, it's exceptionally dangerous. Diabetes is exceptionally dangerous. It causes blindness. It helps to speed up dementia. It causes renal failure. It causes circulatory problems which lead to amputations. It causes pressure areas. It causes heart disease, where the coronary arteries are filled with fat. And to a significant degree, many of the myocardial infarcts or heart attacks which occur in society are directly related to lifestyle issues. Issues which are promoted by private companies in order to maximise profits. Now it's extraordinary in Australia in the 21st century that we can't even pass packaging legislation which alerts people to the amount of additives and the types of additives and the percentage in most packaged food. It's extraordinary that in the 21st century we don't have government-funded program to provide fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh dairy products, fresh meat products that are subsidised for people on limited incomes. It's extraordinary that in the 21st century we don't actually have subsidised mechanisms via which people can address their sedentary lifestyle. It's up to the individual. And if you don't have the resources to go to a gym or have a personal trainer or buy fresh food, the problems escalate. Because it's all very well to say to somebody, you need to eat healthy, you need to exercise, but if their situation they find themselves in means they can't afford fresh healthy food, and they have difficulty exercising, then there's a problem. Now this pandemic has a profound impact on the health system. As I said before, most of the cardiovascular, many of the peripheral vascular problems, many of the kidney problems, many of the problems associated with gross obesity are directly related to the additives in food. And you'd think the first thing that would happen, would there be legislation to limit it. In Mexico, Coca-Cola had an extraordinary impact on the health of Mexicans. It was laden with sugar. It was even fed to babies. Today, there is legislation in Mexico which limits the amount of sugar that is in Coca-Cola, and there has been dramatic reductions in the amount of obesity. At one stage, Mexicans, Mexico, which is a developing nation, had the greatest percentage of obese people in the world. Not that we're not far behind. At least 40% of Australians, 30% of children have increasing problems with obesity and obesity-related diseases. And no wonder we see corporations trying to fill the void by setting up gyms, fitness industry. You know, most of the cooking shows you see on television directly related to the eat fresh phenomenon. But the fact is that in Australian society, as the rest of the world, if you don't have the resources to eat fresh food, if you don't have the resources or the time because you're trying to make enough money to survive, then you are a victim of the society we find ourselves in. And ultimately, obesity has personal consequences but needs societal reform to tackle it. Reform in terms of alerting people to the type of additives which are in food, especially sugar and salt. As I said before, I looked at 7 bottles of passata, some from overseas, some here, some organic, some non-organic. And the key feature was the added sugar. Why do you need to add sugar to tomato? It's extraordinary. Now, if you look at any packet, you'll be amazed at the amount of fat, the amount of cholesterol, the amount of salt, the amount of sugar. And while we don't tax the amount of sugar and salt which is put into these packaged food, we will continue to find ourselves in this same position. Because although we are looking at the problem of climate emergency and starting to make changes in Australia, there is very little momentum to deal with this silent pandemic, deal with obesity, despite the extraordinary pressure it is putting on the public as well as the private health system, and the extraordinary results which occur when people are not aware of what they're eating. Because the monetarisation of food, the monetarisation of breakfast and lunch and tea, when people no longer cook at home but rely on takeaway. I mean, when you look at it, whether it's some corporation which sells you chicken, fried chicken, or whether it's some corporation which uses platforms to deliver that fried chicken, the fact is that that food is what is causing significant harm to you and to the people around you. So if we want to be serious about change, we need to be aware of this silent pandemic and the pressure it places on our health system, as well as the price which is paid by individuals.